Welcome to Modern Financial Wellness, the podcast dedicated to helping you feel better about your finances. I'm your host, Jim Grace, and I'll be your guide as we discuss the psychology of money and explore the emotional aspects that shape our financial decisions and how we feel about them. A quick note before we start, although I do hope that you find the information on this show to be helpful, in no way are any of these discussions to be taken as specific financial advice. Please do your own research and talk to your own advisors, especially when making important financial decisions. Well, hello, Jen Fuhler. Thank you so much for joining us on Modern Financial Wellness. How are you?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I was thinking about this and jumping into a conversation with you that maybe it would make sense. I could describe for those listening how I became aware of your business and your work. If it's helpful for folks, I was kind of clicking around. I've been somewhat obsessed with the world of financial therapy recently. It's become a bigger and bigger part of the industry. I think it's great that there's resources out there for folks that need to access some support. Financial therapists are a thing. They were not a couple of years ago. So just making people aware that there are financial therapists out there if there's more serious issues that clients need to tackle. So I think I was just kind of perusing the Financial Therapy Association database, and I saw you wearing a YNAB t-shirt. And I paused because YNAB is a budgeting tool, and we may touch on that later. So I was just kind of curious of your profile. So financial therapist designation and certification, budget coach. I was interested, still am, in your background and your story. So thanks for coming and being willing to share. To get us going, do you want to take us back and kind of share your journey a little bit? How does one become a financial therapy certified budget coach? Where did that all start for you?
Yeah, so I'm really glad you found my profile there. They've just rolled out a certification program a few years ago, and I haven't gone through that, but I have a graduate certificate in financial therapy from Kansas State. And that was the first step in getting a master's degree in personal financial planning at Kansas State University. So I have the educational background. I look at myself, I incorporate therapy into kind of more of a coaching perspective when it comes to helping people with their money. So I have that background. I definitely think that, anyone with really significant concerns should probably seek out mental health, a mental health professional. So to kind of go back a little bit on how I even found that, I think it was probably about 2010, something like that, many years ago, that I was just kind of caught up in being an adult. I was getting ready to turn 30, so I thought I should probably get my stuff together. I went family, so I wanted to do all those kind of adulting things. So I thought I should probably get this financial piece in order.
Get my stuff together. That's like a phase of life we all go through, right?
Yes, and the funny and then you never really stop going through it. It's kind of like rabbit hole throughout the rest of your life. Once you realize these things and these tools and these perspectives are out there, it's really hard to find that end point. You just always keep learning and keep, or at least I think that's the goal, I think for me at least, is to keep growing in this.
I agree.
I had attended, I think, if anybody's a fan of FinCon out there in 2013. A few years later, I decided to look into financial therapy. I really wanted to be able to teach financial literacy because I didn't think I learned much myself.
And what were you doing professionally at the time? So you're out in the world working at 30 years old. What were you doing at that point as you were starting to explore financial therapy and personal finance?
Yeah, so my background is actually not at all in personal finance. I came to this out of necessity, but I have degrees in English and literature. So I'm a professor at a community college, and I started teaching there at 25. It was my first grown-up job, and it was a tenure track job. So I've stayed there, and I've really enjoyed it. I'm working on a lot of different projects. Nice. So one part of being able to get my full promotion later down the road at the job was to be able to, continue my education. And so I found this program with financial therapy. I thought this would be great to be able to offer classes to my students. I've offered workshops before. I developed a class called just, a business class for personal finance, where we touch on a little bit of everything. So that's kind of what drew me in. Every year, it seemed like I discovered something And so, I found the Financial Therapy Association after doing the graduate certificate. I decided I might as well go ahead and finish the master's degree because I'm a huge nerd and I love school. So finish a master's degree just for fun, which I don't know if many people do master's degrees for fun, but I do. And that kind of led me to trying to figure out how I wanted to use this to serve. I realized that there was a reason why I wasn't interested in it, and I wasn't really figuring it out. So I have spent, a good 10 years trying to figure out what direction this is going to take me in. So I'm still figuring out where I'm going to go. But right now, I'm looking at it from coaching and helping people understand their money stories through the lens of using a budget.
That's awesome. And what to go back to the beginning, maybe you haven't found the answer yet, and it's coming into form how you'll be able to kind of serve people and help people with your expertise and your education. But do you have any insight on where that kind of passion came from? To as an educator to think about, how do I incorporate some of what I'm learning into actual financial literacy programs or to become a budget coach? Where do you think that comes from? What kind of sparked that interest in you?
Well, if you ask my parents, my mom says that my dad had me counting money before I was, learning my ABCs. So as soon as I started talking, he had me kind of doing all of those things. I have really early memories of learning about money and a little bit of a challenging way. I still remember, going to the grocery store with my family and my dad, figure out the best price, the best value for things. So he would point to a ketchup and say, figure out the best value for it. And so we would have to use our little, division minds to figure out the best price per ounce. And so it's kind of always there out of necessity. I have memories of my dad calling the bank before we went to grocery stores and asking how much was in his bank account. So, this was before all the apps and everything to keep track of things. This is back in the old
Mm-hmm.
check register days. So, I can still think about how we would even put the food on the conveyor belt, how we would stop, he would ask the person checking us out to kind of stop at that dollar amount. And so all the fun, sugary stuff was at the end. And so, as a little kid, kind of hoping that those things make
They would make it through.
yes. And so, you find that, those kind of things stay with you. And that's where financial
Right.
really be helpful is you really dig into those kind of stories
Mm.
about money.
That's interesting. So that's something I'm also become much more familiar with and have explored with some of my clients. What are your earliest memories of money? Examples that your parents gave to you or shared with you, showed you, both consciously or subconsciously. So it's interesting to hear that you've kind of inherited, or I shouldn't put that on you. Did you feel like you inherited any of how you operated with money from those experiences that you had with your dad and your family as you started to adult? Did you carry some of that with you? Was that your starting point?
Yeah, I think so. I think growing up in a frugal family, and my parents were teenagers when I was born, so they moved around a lot when I was really, they really were trying to figure out and find their way, and they really did the best they can to provide for us and give us the stability. We had a lot of family in a really good community that we grew up in. I have memories of my grandmother washing out Ziploc bags, and she still does to this day. So, at first I thought grown up that doesn't have to wash my Ziploc bags and reuse them because I thought that what being rich would look like would be able to just
I was just going to say, my grandfather, we tease, we were talking about this recently, actually, that Pop Pop used to unwrap his gifts. He used to be very careful and just slide the package out of the wrapping paper and just hand that back to whoever gave it to him as, this is a perfectly useful piece of paper to hang on to, and not to tear through that and rip that all to pieces. There's multiple use. So it's interesting.
yes, exactly. All those things that we don't really think about as kids, but they kind of become a part of us as we grow older, and we think about that in different ways and really think about the why behind that. Was it a forcefulness thing? Was it a frugal, was it about money, or was it about the resource itself and not wanting to see that in a landfill? So but yeah, all those things kind of tie together and kind of make you who you are today. And I like to think that I've grown a lot. I have a lot of, much more financial security than I did, at 25 or at 30 even, and definitely as a kid now. But those things still creep up. I mentioned the story about, watching the food on the conveyor belts, and I was just having lunch last week, and I ordered like a little lunch special that included a salad. And when I asked told them what salad I wanted, they said, oh, there's an upcharge to that. And I immediately said, okay, I don't want it then. So even
Just
though,
reacted. Yeah, it's built into your brain, right? That's not a good idea.
yeah, so like your brain sometimes will just have that stopping point where this is what I've agreed to pay for. This is what I have agreed to mentally when it comes to finances. And, I just looked up, and a friend who's a psych professor was like, really? Did
Mm,
you really have to, get a salad you didn't want just to avoid that extra dollar or two upcharge? So, you're still that little kid sometimes, and you never know when those moments might creep
yeah.
affect your
Yeah.
life.
So you had an interest in it, found yourself in the world of financial therapy, and started to just kind of understand a bit about yourself and your background and your history, and recognize some of these things that were going on around you as you were kind of going down that educational path.
Yes, I did. One of the first assignments I did was a money genogram. I don't know if you've heard much about that or talked about it before on your show, but it's kind of like a family tree, but for money. So you plot out your family and you think about the memories or the things that might have impacted their relationship with money, and think about how that might have affected yours. And of course, there are all kinds of quizzes you can take to give to people who are in your life to learn more about that. So that was a fun assignment, quizzing my parents and talking
Mm,
about things with grandparents to see what kind of money styles they have, what kind of money stories they have that have influenced me too. So that was definitely a
yeah.
journey.
There's so much there, and the more I'm aware of it, the more I seem to find in the experiences that I have with clients that I work with, where we all carry some of those things, don't we? Good or bad. I mean, it's not all negative. It's not things that we always need to get rid of, but it's our first exposure to how to operate in the world. And in this case, it's related to money, but just like anything else, we kind of pick those things up. And when we start to adult, it's worthwhile. I think the key takeaway is that you do carry some of these things into adulthood. The world that we live in isn't the same as those of our parents and our grandparents. So trying to figure out a framework for, what serves me, what am I going to take with me into adulthood, and what am I going to let go, is a useful exercise. And that's where, is it some of that work in financial therapy, or the exercise that you just described, is that the type of thing that people can kind of tap into to work through some of that stuff?
Yeah, I don't think you really would have to get so deep into your money family history and the genogram and all of that. If you can probably accomplish very similar tasks with just being aware through your budget. Why are you making
Mm,
what you are? What are your priorities? What are your values? And how is that coming through with how you're spending your money? So even just
mhm.
looking at your budget or just looking at your spending in general will tell you a lot of history, I think.
Eh, So that's a great transition. So you're now focused, as you've gone through this journey, the kind of explored personal finance, financial therapy, you've arrived at being a budget coach. That's fair description of what you do?
Yes.
And what is it about budgeting in particular? Did you have any experience with budgeting that kind of informed the work that you do, or kind of pushed you specifically in that direction? Because I think budgeting, it's a bit of a dirty word. Like, we have to think about how we want to title this episode if we even want people to listen to it, because I think there's like a visceral reaction to the idea of budgeting or bookkeeping or tracking spending, because it's just, talk about needing therapy. Like, there's a lot in there. So I'm curious, what is it about budgeting, or was there a time in your money story that kind of set you down the path, you think, towards budgeting specifically?
Yes, I don't know how budgeting has gotten such a bad rap. It has such a negative connotation when it comes to thinking about restriction. Like it's somehow like if you build a budget, you have to cut back on something. Almost in the same way that we've looked at diet. Even though diet is kind of meaning what we eat, a budget is just a plan for your resources. But somehow it's gotten to be that it's something about negative and cutting back and trimming things and saving money. But it's not that at all. It
Mm,
really plan for your money. And, even if you can't get to the point where you're planning ahead, at least you can start by tracking your spending. If nothing else,
mm,
tracking is a good first step. But
mm-hmm.
I mentioned starting, in the 2010 or so, becoming more interested. I had student loans, I had car loans, I had mortgages, I had started a business. It was all kinds of things in the air. And what
All
really,
the stuff that comes with adulting, right?
yeah,
Yeah, the responsibility.
Yeah, and when you're in your 20s and 30s, I think, I've got all the time in the world to pay these things back. And, this is a good debt, right? This mortgage is a good debt. Student loan is a good debt. I was very lucky with my student loan process and being able to find funding for my education. But what really kind of made the big impact on me when it came to the importance of a budget was going through a divorce. And I had used YNAB, but I was using it just for tracking spending. And I was really good. And this is something I definitely picked up from my parents, is just writing on the back of envelopes, doing little budgets like, this is how much is my account, this is what's coming out. So I would do things with Excel, pencil and paper. I had been on YNAB, but I didn't really click for me. And so
Hmm.
when it clicked for me, and I was going through divorce, one nice thing about it is you can do as many budgets as you want. So I
Hmm.
was doing it for all the different scenarios that could unfold as the result
Oh,
of my
wow.
divorce. So, I had a budget for like if I kept the house or we sold the house, or, really wanting to know if I would be, what kind of lifestyle I was going to be able to maintain for my kids and for
Right.
myself. So, luckily, the best case scenario ended up working out for me, that I
Yeah.
had been first, but I don't think I would have had that clarity if I didn't have a budget.
So we should clarify for people, YNAB, YNAB.com is a website. It's a budgeting app and tool. It stands for youneedabudget.com. And jump in, correct me if I describe any of this incorrectly. But it's built on a very specific philosophy, which we can get into kind of their approach and your work with that tool and how you coach people. But I'm curious, how long has YNAB been around, and where were you starting to do some of this were you already through your education at this point? Like, when did you start really picking up the budgeting piece with YNAB?
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that with YNAB, because it's just a word I throw, an acronym I
Right.
throw around, all forgetting that not everybody geeks out over this like I do. So, yes, stands for You Need a Budget. And you'll find, if you look online, there are a lot of videos, a lot of great resources. It really is, an awesome product. But it's a zero-based budgeting approach. And so even if you don't go the route of using YNAB, the philosophy that they have, the budgeting rules that they have, and just having a zero-based budget, does very similar end goals. And by
Hmm.
zero-based, I just mean that you take all the dollars and you give them all jobs. It's like throwing all of your money on the kitchen table and putting them in envelopes like they did, before technology,
Hmm.
just to help us out with that. So it's really just being able to give every dollar a job. And that's the first rule of the YNAB system, is giving everybody every dollar a job. I'm not
Hmm.
sure when they started, sometime in the early 2000s. It started off as a spreadsheet. It has just grown. It's grown a
Oh,
lot. And
okay. So it's been around that long. Okay.
yeah,
Okay. So you were familiar with it. And based on your background in your household when you were married, were you the budgeter? Were you kind of the CFO of the household? What were the dynamics with money back then?
oh, that's definitely a lot going on there. But
Oh,
yeah, I was the main income earner. We had kind of a split situation with the kids, and he was also an educator, so we kind of worked our school schedules around each other. But I was definitely, out of necessity. I think I just really thought that I really wanted to be able to, especially having children. Once I had my first kiddo at 31, I thought, I don't want to pass down the things that the bad experiences. And it's not that I had a lot of bad experiences. It was just, a life of kind of growing
mhm.
up with of resources, provide them a different lifestyle. And I taught a lot of extra classes. I did everything I can. I was very aware, at any point you could have asked me, and I would have told you exactly what's in my bank account. But
Okay.
surprisingly, with budgeting, I don't know exactly what's in my now. I know what's in my budget. And once you really get fluent in
Right.
using you go to your budget instead of going to your
Right.
bank.
So I'm always curious, like, who plays that role? Because somebody defaults into it by necessity or interest, or, in some cases, just some person wanting to have control of that aspect of the household. It sounds like in your case, you kind of defaulted into that role out of necessity of kind of managing the household finances. So you're going into this experience of being divorced with that expertise and background and being on top of the household finances. But I'd imagine like through that period of time, that's stressful for everybody, regardless of how amicable or whatever the circumstances are, right? You're going through a big transition, which I don't think a lot of people spend enough time thinking or talking about related to their finances. If you're going through these big changes, good, bad, indifferent, just these periods of transition, it's stressful, both mentally and emotionally. So I'm hearing you I want to get back to this, what you described before of being able to actually model different scenarios. So you're going through and thinking about the future. What if I go down this path or that path? And budgeting was a tool that allowed you to kind of get some clarity and I'd imagine some peace of mind with all of that. Did you find that budgeting helped you feel better about what was happening or what was in front of you?
It did. And one thing that, I think is a really important takeaway, from my perspective on budgeting, is that budgeting, if done really right and intentionally, it becomes kind of like a journal. And so I was able to, kind of journal through my feelings about what I wanted for the next step of my life. And I did that with money, and I did that with words, and I did that on paper, and I did that on the app. And so it kind of became a way for me to really clearly see what was possible.
Wow.
Because when going through it, I definitely don't recommend the process, and it can vary so much financially too. My process was pretty straightforward, and it happened right before COVID. So, I wouldn't recommend, getting a divorce before a pandemic or during a pandemic. Puts a lot of stress on you, because I literally just life just changed completely. And I don't know now, looking back, I don't know how much of that stress was attributed to, going into the pandemic and being alone with my kids and being suddenly homeschooling and teaching
That's a
online.
whole other podcast episode, right? Of what's happening during the pandemic.
Definitely. And so, you're able to kind of think about what future you want, and instead of being depressed about what's ending, and I definitely did a lot of that, having a budget and running through those different scenarios gave me a little bit of hope for what was possible on the
Mm,
other. And you get so worn down. And I've seen several other, friends go through divorces, and mine was relatively inexpensive. They can get up to, a couple of examples of 50,000 plus. And
yeah.
it's just something you bounce back from quickly, and it affects so many of your decisions going forward.
Mm,
You have to factor all those things in, from housing, to childcare, just so many different factors. And so, at least having that budget piece and being able to see what the options were, and knowing how all this was going to fold in and unfold
yeah.
over time, definitely gave me a lot of peace of mind. In a very turbulent time, which there's not a lot
Yeah.
of peace of mind during.
I'm hearing so much in that example in the story. Thank you for sharing that because I think it's really can be useful for people to hear. And it doesn't have to be divorce, but I talk to a lot of people who are just a little stressed out given the day to day, right? You mentioned the pandemic and being home and lockdown and everything we all dealt with during that period of time. But I think a lot of us in just regular day to day life, when things are going pretty well, it can be stressful and anxiety inducing. And especially if you're not somebody like you who built a background and a passion around personal finance and budgeting, if you don't have that expertise, it can kind of be daunting of like, where do I start? And this is a foreign language. But I hope people hear in your story how much control that you had and peace of mind and maybe some empowerment, like in thinking about the future that I can't handle this. We're going to be okay. And it's not as bad as maybe it seems. And I think that's what a lot of clients that I work with who are stressed about money, it's not really as bad as they think it is. They just don't have really good clarity or visibility about what their situation looks like. And budgeting the right way can be a really empowering experience for a lot of people. And you don't have to go through a divorce to experience that. You can alleviate some of that stress and anxiety by doing it the right way. So I'm grateful that you're willing to kind of share that experience with people because I think there's a lot of folks that are going through a similar thing, whether it's divorce or other kind of transition or just a difficult period of time, where really focusing on what are the things that I can control and you can control your budget, like starting at that point is a really empowering kind of useful place to start. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk budgeting a little bit. You mentioned YNAB as a tool. Do you want to walk us through kind of high level, every dollar needing a job, or just what are some of the key concepts because it's one tool of many. I guess we should say this episode or the podcast is not sponsored by YNAB. I'm interested in your story and learning a little bit more about the platform, but this isn't a paid advertorial, if you will, for that tool. But can you share with us a little bit, if people wanted to check out YNAB, what would they find, and what is that, what are they bringing to the table, so to speak?
Yeah, so I have a full disclaimer on my website. I'm a YNAB certified coach. So I don't work for YNAB. I don't get any kickback from YNAB. They're a wonderful company, but my opinions are my own opinions, and that full disclaimer is online too. So YNAB is, as I mentioned, a zero-based budgeting program, and there are lots that you can research and find if you just search for zero-based budgeting, or even envelope system budgeting. Those things might give you some very similar results.
And let's explain that, because I think that's a great analogy. I think a lot of people are familiar with the envelopes, right? So you're setting aside a certain amount of money in every task or expense within the household. So your mortgage, your water bill, what have you, each has an envelope, and you're stuffing money into those and making sure that you've got enough cash set aside for all your bills. That's a lot of how our parents and grandparents learned to do it, correct?
Ideally, that's how, yeah, they should have been.
Ideally. Ideally. But so YNAB is the next evolution, a technological evolution, similar concept though, right? That every dollar should go into an envelope, quote unquote. Is that kind of a bit of the philosophy that it's built around?
Yeah, so you're giving them, instead of an envelope, you're putting them into a category. And you have category groups, like your fixed expenses, like mortgages and water bills, and then you have your regular expenses, your food budgets, your gas money, fun money, plans, your big goals, all of those different things. And the nice thing about using the YNAB system is that you can rename everything. There's no one size fits all with budgeting. And I think that's what probably trips up some people, is thinking, I have to fit into a certain, or certain, certain categories. But the second rule is actually to embrace your true expenses. So not only do you have those envelopes for those things you're going to spend money on, you also have started some mental envelopes for things that you might spend money on at some point, like car repair, vet bills, all of those things that when you look at money at the end of the month, you think, wow, that was an unusual month. But really, when you look at every month's unusual in some way.
That's such a great point. And I think I hear that all the time. So we start talking to people about how much do you spend every month in the beginning of our process, and they give us a number, and it's always more than that. And then when we get 30 days later and we're looking backward, say they told us they were going to spend $8,000 and they spent 10, they always have a list of things that came up. But that list is always things that come up, right? We're always going to want to go on vacation. We're always going to need the car repairs, as you described. Like there's always something else, isn't there, kind of built in that is separate from just the regular bills that we all know off the top of our head.
Yes, there's always something. So, if you're sitting here, you've got graduation season coming up, you've got, even just the extra expenses of maybe buying new clothes for your kids, buying new swimsuits, buying sunblock. I mean, all those different things, they creep into your budget and they creep into that spending. And so thinking ahead and creating little categories or little envelopes for those expenses that are unusual and putting a little bit every month into them. I mean, it's not fun and exciting, but it makes a big difference that Amazon Prime bill comes through and you think, oh, I don't have that, didn't plan for that. But if you did, budget for it, you could just put aside a little bit every month, or even every month, and it might look a little bit different. It won't feel as shocking if you look at it in little pieces instead of that big expense that rolls now and then.
So every dollar having a job, building those categories or envelopes. What else is kind of built into YNAB that you like, or what would you want to share with folks that they might experience?
Yeah, so so we've got the rolling with giving every dollar a job, the planning for those true expenses, those things that sneak up, like every year holidays sneak up on us, even though we know when they're coming, we know when birthdays or other celebrations happen, but we still get caught off guard with it. Rolling with the punches is their third rule, which is really just thinking about, I put, $1,000 in this envelope, but I spent more than that. So which envelope am I going to take that money from? You're going to borrow from other categories, and there's no shame in that. There is just thinking about what your priorities are. And I say this with my kids sometimes. They'll say, I want to go out to eat, or I want this thing from the store. And so I'll remind them, okay, I have no money in that budget category. Where is it going to come from? And so when I say it has to come from our summer fun category or, travel budget, they have a decision to then make. And, my kids are 8 and 11, but I still think that's, a decent age to start thinking about these trade-offs that you make.
Yeah.
You buy whatever is within your limits, but you know that you trade off somewhere else down the road.
That's such a great rule, I think. And that's another thing that I don't think enough people think about in our modern world. We swipe a card or we make a payment at Amazon. We don't even have to think about where that money is coming from. We kind of set up those transactions ahead of time and money just flows through our household. And we're never forced to make a decision about what that trade-off is. So if you're spending money over here, it's going to come away from something else, right? And it's not necessarily where you should spend your money. It's consciously and intentionally thinking about where you are and making those decisions with eyes wide open. It just is what it is, right? Being aware and just being aware of what you have available and where those trade-offs are.
Yes. And that scarcity kind of forces you to be creative sometimes too. Like if you really don't want to take money from another category or another area of your life, you can figure out what other ways can I accomplish all of this? What something cheaper? Can I borrow it from somebody? What can I do? And that scarcity really makes you think about, really what your priorities are. And that gets financial therapy piece too. If you are really sound in what your priorities and your values are, you'll make by default better decisions with your money.
Do you, that's kind of a sidetrack topic, but when you're coaching people, do you bring up values, priorities, hope streams, what makes them happy? Like, how do you incorporate that? Because I find that in my own personal life, not even speaking about the experiences with clients, but I know when we are conscious of what my wife and I, that is, agree upon as being important, when we have that kind of pinned to the top of our budget conversations, it's much easier than if we're just going in and kind of winging it and taking a look at what we're spending. So to me, like when you don't do that, it just brings up this opportunity to point at the other person and judge where they're spending money. And I'm talking about being in a couple, but just for your own self, like not being aware of that can cause issues as I've seen it. Do you try to help people kind of sort through that, or at least incorporate it into the budgeting process?
Yeah, absolutely. That's really the first thing to talk about is why. Why are you doing this? Thinking about financial therapy and financial planning and financial literacy too. Those are all parts of this bigger, this big financial planning process. So you think about financial literacy as the what. You have to know the basics. You have to know all those foundational things when it comes to money. And then the financial planning piece that you're very well familiar with is the how and the when. And so, I want to save, you're talking with your spouse or family. I want to save X amount to send somebody to college or to retire at a certain age. Those all kind of come in with that. And then the financial therapy piece is kind of the why, right? And the who, like, who are you? Who is your spouse? What are your goals for your family? Where do down the line. So having those conversations are really important, and they can't necessarily happen all the time. So if somebody comes to me and they just want a budget, I can definitely help with that. So you just want to know if you're overspending or if you're spending within your means. I can absolutely do that. But if you want to dig a little bit more and spend some more time with that, that's really where I would have as a starting point, is thinking about where your goals are, what the other people in your life, how they will be impacted by that, and what their goals are, so they can kind of come together to come up with those.
That's great. So are there any other kind of core principles of the YNAB system or budgeting in general that we should kind of be aware of or be introduced to?
Yeah, so the last rule with it is to age your money. So the real goal, if you're really wanting to set yourself up for financial success, is putting some space between when you're earning that money and when you're spending that money. And YNAB built in, they have an age of money number that shows up. And so if you can get your money aged to about 30 days, you know that you're living on, or you have a good sense of whether you're living on last month's income or not. You can, also think about creating categories for next month. If you're living paycheck to paycheck and you don't want to do that anymore, you create a category called next month, and then anything that's left over or extra money that you didn't expect can go into that category and build that up to the point where that equals the amount that you would have earned in a month. And so you're really
Mm,
just spending last month's income is, I think, one way that you get so much more peace and clarity is if you can live on last month's or previous month, 6 months ago, that money I earned back in December is, paying for my summer trip and not the money that I'm
right.
earning.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
One of the big things that I learned about that I hadn't learned through my education with using YNAB is called the credit card float. And I was doing this and not even realizing it. I thought I was on top of things. I thought I pay my credit card bill off in full every month, so I must be doing okay. But what I realized was that I was planning on the next paycheck in order to be able to pay that. So if you're looking at your bank account and you can't actually today pay that credit card balance in full, and still meet everything else before that more money comes in, you're kind of floating yourself a little bit. And so one of the things
Hmm.
you can budget coaching or just, using a budget in general, to find ways to pay for that right now. So I use a credit card for pretty much everything. Most of my bills, all of my spending goes on a credit card. And the wonderful thing about YNAB, one of my favorite tools, and the reason why I keep using it, even though I feel like I have a pretty good grasp of my budget, is that when you spend on a credit card, it actually takes the money. So let's say I go to the gas station and I spend $50. It takes $50 from the gas station category and moves it into a credit card payment bill. So I know exactly by looking at my budget how much my credit card bill is, and I know I have money set aside to be able to pay it off in full, and that has in mind.
So it's kind of reconciling both ends of the transaction in front of you in one place so you can get a visualization. Otherwise, it's this outstanding credit card balance that you may need to log into either online or on your phone, and it's a bank statement. YNAB allows you to reconcile those two things. You've spent it on the credit card, you need to account for it in your cash today, and it helps you do that.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
everything can be up. You can do it manually or have it recorded automatically. And so everything is there. You see the full picture. You can look into your bank account and you get only part of your financial picture. Log into your credit card and you get a different piece of it. This puts kind of everything all together.
Mm,
And you can, I'm sure, do that on your own with Excel and other ways to do that. But I just like the convenience of it is that I know that the money is there if I wanted to pay off my credit card bill today, and
mm,
avoid any late payments. It's sitting there. Everything can be reconciled. Your bank account can be reconciled, credit cards. And it's
yeah.
allowed me to simplify finances quite a bit. I used to have different checking accounts for different things. So I would have my bills come out of one and my spending come out of the other. And I had this complicated system that I thought was genius, but of course, overly complicated. So now I have just a checking account, a high yield savings account, credit card, everything's simplified. It
Hmm.
runs smoother than it did in the past.
And I bet you feel better when things are running smoothly, right? You can notice a difference that things are set up and automated and you're just on top of it. The thing, aging your money, I think that's a pretty cool concept. I wasn't really familiar with that as you described it, but it made me think of something we learned from a prior guest, Derek Hagan. He's a mindfulness meditation coach. He's also into the financial therapy world. He may have even graduated from K-State, to be honest with you. And I should check that before I release this because he'll kill me if I don't remember where he went to school. But in the areas of mindfulness that he works, he talks about separating ourselves from the transaction, putting space in between our reaction to want to buy something and the pain of having to actually pay for it, and just kind of separating ourselves and sitting with that for a little bit before we actually spend the money. And that, as you described, aging your money kind of reminded me of that conversation. And I don't think we do that enough. So having this goal of maybe just getting ahead of it, planning a little bit more for the next month, maybe gives us a little bit of motivation and help in making better decisions. Maybe I don't need that right now. And that pause of, am I going to spend money on this, is something that I think is a learned and maybe lost skill, just because we live in this modern world where it's easy to spend. So that's an interesting kind of theme that's appeared through different conversations now, and aging your money and kind of giving yourself some space between when you're going to actually make a transaction. You might come to next month and say, well, hey, it turned out I didn't need that in the first place, and I'm glad now I have the money still in the bank because now I feel ahead of the game.
Yes, it's all about choices, and that all goes to opportunity cost too, right? Your every decision you make you can't make another decision. So that budget and putting that space in between your decisions can definitely help you
Hmm.
really align yourself with what your future
Yeah.
goals are.
Yeah, so I think, I'm glad you took the time. I'm grateful that you're here to share a little bit about YNAB and your background. I think that budgeting is something that, as planners or advisors in general, the industry kind of glosses over because everybody wants to get to the fun stuff and invest and plan for retirement and send our kids to school and all that fun stuff. But I think that there are a lot of people out there, myself included, that are feeling a little bit stressed or maybe overwhelmed with their day to day. And I think if we all just put a little bit more intention on the front end of the plan and understanding cash flow, or maybe I shouldn't even say front of the plan. It's kind of an ongoing thing, as you described. It's just this ever going journey, right? If we just put a little bit more attention on the cash flow piece and the budgeting piece, I think we can all kind of alleviate some of that stress and anxiety, feel a little bit more control. And that sets us up for more success in the other areas of our financial plan, whether it's investing or what have you. So I think it's a great service that you provide. I'm glad that you're out there doing the work. Is there anything else related to budgeting or your background, any words of wisdom that you might want to share for folks that are listening today?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned it already. Looking at your budget is more of a journal. Spend so much time thinking about how we're going to earn the money, and then I think on the spending side, the money flows in, and then it just kind of flows out without as much thought. So thinking about or putting money back out into the world as consciously as you take that money into the world with your career or your jobs, businesses, trying to think about that full cycle and making sure that what's going out is actually lining up with how you want it. I tell my kids all the time when they spend something or they waste something. I'm hoping I'm not messing them up in different ways than I was, but I'm like, when I go into my office and work, I'm trading my time for money, and then I'm trading that money for something that you just wasted. So really, when you think about it, you just kind of, took some of my time. And so if you can take that time element and put it back in, and there are lots of books that can, kind of show you how, equating your money with your time, it gives you a much different perspective on that. As much as it's helpful to look back and what's impacted you from your childhood, to be thinking have really little kids, thinking about the money messages that are being sent to them now, and kind of studying the way they already look at money. My kids are completely different. One's a saver, one's a spender. One feels like it has to go out the door as soon as it comes in. The other one wants to sit, in a wallet for like years if she could. So if you can be aware of what your children's natural tendencies and how they view money, it can help you give them more, well-crafted lessons in money, so you can be a little bit more conscious of that. So if you
Hmm.
see being more of a saver, you can kind of encouraging them to, research what they want a little bit more and think about what they want. And if you've got someone who's a spender, to put that time in there that we've already talked about, put some space in between when you want something and when you get that something.
Mm,
And that happens, we can see it in our everyday lives. When you order something online, there's that excitement of buying it, but then there's also that excitement of when you actually get it. So if you can remember how it feels to put that space in between when you order it, when you get it, that same can be made for any purchases, whether it's face-to-face or online. Just putting some
mm.
more time and get to enjoy that space and look forward to being able to make that decision or spend that money.
Right. That's all great advice. My oldest is 6. We've just now started to talk to him a little bit about money and what it means and thinking about saving and having to make those choices. Well, how old were your kids? How old are they now? And when did you start to really introduce the concept of money with them? Just out of
Uh,
curiosity.
they're 8 and 11 now, but unfortunately they've had it since they were really little.
Since they
Yeah,
arrived, huh? Yeah.
they saw talking about it. They saw me. They know budgets. In fact, when we go to a gas station, sometimes I'll just hand them my phone and the receipt, and they'll log it into YNAB for me.
Oh, wow.
They're
Cool.
with it. And I think the more we can talk about it, the less likely we will have these big, crazy moments, the ones that have this impact on it. So if it's always kind of part of the conversation and in either in a neutral way or in a positive way, it can kind
Hmm.
of counteract some of those bigger messages that were unexpected. So yeah, I think I wouldn't recommend doing it when you first start talking necessarily like I experienced, but pretty early on when they start to want things, you can start
Hmm.
to make that want with money.
That's a great distinction. I think that's where we're at, just for whatever it's worth. Again, my oldest is 6 and he wants things. He sees things that his friends have or on TV or what have you. He's picking up that he can access some things in the world. And we're just starting to introduce that concept that, well, if you want that, that means X, right? You're going to have to take some of the money that you have stashed away in that wallet that you keep in that drawer, and you're going to have to, part with it, right? So do you want to make that decision? What's it worth to you? So that's, again, that might be a whole other podcast episode, kids and money and how to handle that. But I appreciate you bringing it up. You mentioned books about budgeting or philosophy. Is there anything, one book, podcasts you listen to, websites you visit besides YNAB? Obviously, if people wanted to explore budgeting or, making those choices, would you recommend anything in particular off the top of your head? Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, one of the books that I was really important to me as I got started thinking about it was Your Money or Your Life. And that's one of the books that gets tossed around a lot because it's been around. It has a new revision more recently because the advice given in the earlier model has been a little outdated with the current systems as they are now. But it really helps you to think about that connection between your time and your energy and your money. So when you see something you want, you don't necessarily look at it in terms of this is how many dollars it costs, but this is how many hours of my life it costs. And I think that was a big change for me when I could start to think about buying this meant that I have to teach an extra class, or I wouldn't have to teach an extra class if I didn't buy this. So it really helps you put that connection. And I think that's an important connection to instill with kids too, and at any point in your life. And also to be thinking about it, your retired version of you, that purchase today could actually mean, you get to retire a month early. So thinking about it, it depends too.
That's a great recommendation. And I think there's probably a lot applicable there in this whole kind of movement towards not even necessarily the FIRE community, but financial independence in general. And where are we spending our time? And are we doing the things that we want to be doing? And are we feeling fulfilled? So there's probably a ton there. So I appreciate that. So tell us about, where should people find you if they are interested in YNAB, they feel like they need a coach? I would strongly encourage people to reach out to you and get in contact. Where should people check you out?
Yeah. Oh, so since I do have the full-time kids and a full-time job, this is something I do more as a hobby. So I'm not really out there a whole lot. I have my website, which is jenfuhler.com. That's spelled FUHLER.com. And then I have a Facebook group. I guess I'm not on Twitter or Instagram or anything, but there are a lot of really great resources out there. There is a YNAB coaching directory. So even if you felt like maybe my personalities or my approach isn't the best match for you, there are so many other great coaches out there that have all gone through the training. They all have a lot of enthusiasm for it. There's the Financial Therapy Association that has therapists out there. So lots of different resources out there.
So, and YNAB, we should remind people, YNAB, youneedabudget.com is what it stands for. JenFuhler.com. We'll definitely send people in your direction. Again, highly encourage, if nothing else, just go check out YNAB and start thinking about budgeting. And there's a lot of tools and resources out there for folks to start unpacking some of this stuff. The last question before I let you go, this is a podcast about financial well-being or wellness and well-being in general. Is there anything besides budgeting that makes you feel better and improves your well-being as a whole? Any life hacks, tricks, habits, anything that you would kind of point people to that has made you feel a little bit better about and improved your well-being that you'd like to share?
Yeah, that's a great question. I kind of hinted at this a little bit earlier, but journaling has been something that's been very helpful. It helped me through my divorce. It helps me every day. My daughter has a little diary app on her tablet now. So just getting in the about your life, not necessarily after it happens, maybe even before it happens, just writing down anything that happens to you. Having gone through divorce, I find it very helpful to be able to write down little stories of my kids and our adventures, because I don't have somebody to be able to share those memories with, especially while they're really little. So anytime you can carve out time to write is important. Of course, I'm an English teacher too, so I have to say the importance of writing and then reading back over those. Sometimes we write and we just leave them alone. But when you feel that stress, sometimes visiting that older version of yourself can really show you how far you've come, and it'll give you a hint of go.
That's awesome. I had never heard of budgeting as a kind of a quantitative journal of what's going on in your life, but I'm definitely connecting the dots and seeing the threads to your English background, your passion for personal finance and budgeting, and what YNAB provides. So that's a great share. So thank you for that. Appreciate it. So thank you, Jen. I've enjoyed our time. I think this is really enlightening. Hopefully it'll help a lot of people to just take the first step and check you out, check out YNAB, check something out. Just start looking at your expenses and hopefully feel some of that control and realize that the future is bright and feel better about their financial situation. So thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.